$59,700,000. That is the number the Department of Justice put on the case in January, the case that named the pharmaceutical company that had been paying me for 28 months. $37,400 in honoraria, 9 dinners for 4 people each, 1 small rosewood plaque that sat on the 3rd shelf of my waiting room for 3 years, beside my Penn neurology diplomas, and that I lifted off that shelf the morning the settlement landed and placed in the lower right drawer of my kitchen sideboard, on top of a manila folder containing 3 signed educational engagement agreements and 1 IRS Form 1099. My name is Abina Akosua Corte Morrison. I am a community neurologist in West Philadelphia, and I am the doctor they paid, and I am the doctor who reported herself. I want you to sit with that pairing before I tell you anything else, because it is the only honest place to begin. I was the recipient. I was also the relator. The same hand that took the check signed the key TAM complaint that returned the money to the federal government with interest. There is no clean version of what I am about to describe. There is only the version where I tell you the truth in the order it actually happened. It is a Thursday morning in November of 2026. I am sitting at the kitchen table in my row home at 4814 Spruce Street, West Philadelphia, a narrow brick house built in 1924, sage green walls, a window that looks out onto a thin slice of the street, and the row of identical brick houses across the way. The DOJ press release from January is printed and folded twice on the table beside my coffee. I have read it 40 times. I am going to read it once more, with you, and I am going to walk you through every part of how it came to be written. I owe you that. I owe my patients that. I owe my father that. He died in May of 2024, 6 months before any of this surfaced publicly, and I am going to tell you what he would have said if he had been alive to read the press release with me at this table. I am also going to tell you the Twi sentence he taught me when I was 13 years old and stuck on a calculus homework problem. That sentence is the spine of this entire account. Aben, ade a den no, ye no bere bere. Daughter, the thing that is hard, do it slowly. He sat next to me at our Strawberry Mansion kitchen table in 1983, and he did not look at the homework. He looked at me. He waited for me to be still. Then he said the sentence, and he stood up and he made tea. That is the rhythm I learned from him. Slowly, slowly, slowly. I am going to use that rhythm now, because what I have to tell you cannot be delivered any other way. I went to Penn for medical school, Penn for neurology residency from 1994 to 1997, and Jefferson Headache Center for a 1-year fellowship from 1997 to 1998. I trained under Dr. Steven Silberstein, who had founded the Jefferson program and who had been telling fellows since the early 1990s that the next real revolution in headache medicine would come from a calcitonin gene-related peptide pathway, which was then a research curiosity. He was right. He was right 22 years before any of this story begins. I want you to hold that fact, because the drug at the center of what I am going to describe was not a fraud. The drug worked. The science behind it was real. That is the part most people get wrong when they hear about pharmaceutical settlements. They assume the drug is bad. The drug was good. The structure around the drug was the problem. The structure around the drug was where the kickbacks lived. I left academic medicine in 2006. I had been 3 years on the Penn faculty clinic schedule, and I could not keep doing it. The panel had been screened down to insurance types that were profitable to the institution. My patients were waiting 32 minutes for 15-minute slots. The administration was running productivity dashboards at the morning huddle. I was 40 years old, and I could feel my hands beginning to hurry through examinations the way a tired waiter hurries through a six-top. I told my division chief I was leaving to open a solo practice. He looked surprised, then resigned, then a little impressed. He wrote me a kind letter. I have it in a drawer. I rented the second floor of a converted brick row home at 4814 Spruce Street in 1998, right out of fellowship, and I had been working out of that office since. I bought a row home of my own a few blocks away in 2008 for $190,000. 40% of my panel was Medicare Part D and Medicaid. The rest was a mix of commercial and self-pay. I saw migraine patients, post-concussive patients, occipital neuralgia, hemicrania, cluster, the whole headache spectrum. My waiting room had 3 shelves on the back wall. Top shelf, my Penn diplomas. Middle shelf, my Jefferson Fellowship certificate, and a photograph of my mother, Caroline. Third shelf, empty until 2021. My father was Kofi Kwabena Korte. He was born in Kumasi in 1948. Methodist Boys High School in Cape Coast through 1966. University of Ghana at Legon, BA Economics, 1971. Bank of Ghana Research Department for 5 years. UPenn Graduate Fellowship in 1978. He met my mother on his second Sunday in Philadelphia at Mother Bethel AME on Lombard Street through her cousin who was a graduate student in his department. They married at Mother Bethel in 1980. He started his PhD coursework. The Ghanaian economy collapsed in 1981 and his fellowship money got reorganized and he never finished the dissertation. He became an evening adjunct in $59,700,000. That is the number the Department of Justice put on the case in January, the case that named the pharmaceutical company that had been paying me for 28 months. $37,400 in honoraria, 9 dinners for 4 people each, 1 small rosewood plaque that sat on the 3rd shelf of my waiting room for 3 years, beside my Penn neurology diplomas, and that I lifted off that shelf the morning the settlement landed and placed in the lower right drawer of my kitchen sideboard, on top of a manila folder containing 3 signed educational engagement agreements and 1 IRS Form 1099. My name is Abina Akosua Korte Morrison. I am a community neurologist in West Philadelphia, and I am the doctor they paid, and I am the doctor who reported herself. I want you to sit with that pairing before I tell you anything else, because it is the only honest place to begin. I was the recipient. I was also the relator. The same hand that took the check signed the key TAM complaint that returned the money to the federal government with interest. There is no clean version of what I am about to describe. There is only the version where I tell you the truth in the order it actually happened. It is a Thursday morning in November of 2026. I am sitting at the kitchen table in my row home at 4814 Spruce Street, West Philadelphia, a narrow brick house built in 1924, sage green walls, a window that looks out onto a thin slice of the street, and the row of identical brick houses across the way. The DOJ press release from January is printed and folded twice on the table beside my coffee. I have read it 40 times. I am going to read it once more, with you, and I am going to walk you through every part of how it came to be written. I owe you that. I owe my patients that. I owe my father that. He died in May of 2024, 6 months before any of this surfaced publicly, and I am going to tell you what he would have said if he had been alive to read the press release with me at this table. I am also going to tell you the Twi sentence he taught me when I was 13 years old and stuck on a calculus homework problem. That sentence is the spine of this entire account. Aben, ade a den no, ye no bere bere. Daughter, the thing that is hard, do it slowly. He sat next to me at our Strawberry Mansion kitchen table in 1983, and he did not look at the homework. He looked at me. He waited for me to be still. Then he said the sentence, and he stood up and he made tea. That is the rhythm I learned from him. Slowly, slowly, slowly. I am going to use that rhythm now, because what I have to tell you cannot be delivered any other way. I went to Penn for medical school, Penn for neurology residency from 1994 to 1997, and Jefferson Headache Center for a 1-year fellowship from 1997 to 1998. I trained under Dr. Steven Silberstein, who had founded the Jefferson program and who had been telling fellows since the early 1990s that the next real revolution in headache medicine would come from a calcitonin gene-related peptide pathway, which was then a research curiosity. He was right. He was right 22 years before any of this story begins. I want you to hold that fact, because the drug at the center of what I am going to describe was not a fraud. The drug worked. The science behind it was real. That is the part most people get wrong when they hear about pharmaceutical settlements. They assume the drug is bad. The drug was good. The structure around the drug was the problem. The structure around the drug was where the kickbacks lived. I left academic medicine in 2006. I had been 3 years on the Penn faculty clinic schedule, and I could not keep doing it. The panel had been screened down to insurance types that were profitable to the institution. My patients were waiting 32 minutes for 15-minute slots. The administration was running productivity dashboards at the morning huddle. I was 40 years old, and I could feel my hands beginning to hurry through examinations the way a tired waiter hurries through a six-top. I told my division chief I was leaving to open a solo practice. He looked surprised, then resigned, then a little impressed. He wrote me a kind letter. I have it in a drawer. I rented the second floor of a converted brick row home at 4814 Spruce Street in 1998, right out of fellowship, and I had been working out of that office since. I bought a row home of my own a few blocks away in 2008 for $190,000. 40% of my panel was Medicare Part D and Medicaid. The rest was a mix of commercial and self-pay. I saw migraine patients, post-concussive patients, occipital neuralgia, hemicrania, cluster, the whole headache spectrum. My waiting room had 3 shelves on the back wall. Top shelf, my Penn diplomas. Middle shelf, my Jefferson Fellowship certificate, and a photograph of my mother, Caroline. Third shelf, empty until 2021. My father was Kofi Kwabena Korte. He was born in Kumasi in 1948. Methodist Boys High School in Cape Coast through 1966. University of Ghana at Legon, B.A. Economics, 1971. Bank of Ghana Research Department for 5 years. UPenn Graduate Fellowship in 1978. He met my mother on his second Sunday in Philadelphia at Mother Bethel AME on Lombard Street, through her cousin who was a graduate student in his department. They married at Mother Bethel in 1980. He started his PhD coursework. The Ghanaian economy collapsed in 1981, and his fellowship money got reorganized, and he never finished the dissertation. He became an evening adjunct in economics at Temple University's Center City campus, 1 course per semester, fall and spring, for 32 years, from 1982 until he retired in 2014. America never promised him tenure. America promised him an evening course. He took the deal, and he taught the course, and he wore a tweed jacket with elbow patches he had sewn back on himself in 1991 because the originals had worn through, and he had refused to buy a new jacket. That was my father. My mother was Caroline E.C. Morrison Korte. She was born in Greensboro, North Carolina, in 1953. NCCU, B.A. Education, 1975. AME Church her whole life. She came to Philadelphia for a teaching position in 1976 at Anna L. Howard Elementary School in West Philadelphia, and she taught second grade in that building for 38 years until she retired in 2010. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in May of 2017, and she died at home on August 11, 2019. We buried her at Mount Moriah Cemetery on King Sessing Avenue in the African American section, which had been overgrown for decades and which a small volunteer group had begun clearing in 2011. My father chose the plot. He said his bones would lie next to her bones eventually, and he wanted both of them in a place that the city had forgotten and that descendants were now remembering. He said it in that order, the forgetting first, the remembering second. He said the Twi word for that pattern is Sankofa. I will come back to the wooden bird he bought me in Cobbs Creek Park in 1991. I will come back to it 3 times. My daughter is Amma Caroline Korte Morrison. She was born at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in 1998. She got the compound surname. She wanted it. She is 27 years old as I sit here. She matched into internal medicine at HUP in March of 2026. Her white coat ceremony was at Drexel in May of 2022, and her match list was at Drexel in March of 2026. And she is starting intern year on July 1st, 2026, 6 weeks from when I am narrating this. She lives in a Powelton Village apartment with 2 roommates from her Drexel cohort. She comes for Sunday dinner most weeks. She thinks her mother is a quiet woman with strong hands and strong opinions about generic sumatriptan. That is mostly accurate. There are parts she does not yet know. I will tell you about the November 2021 dinner conversation we had about the new plaque in the waiting room, because that conversation matters. The first time the migraine class drug rimegepant came across my desk as a real prescribing option was 2019. I read the Phase 3 data on the first published trial that summer, and I sat in the small office I keep behind exam room 2, and I felt something I had not felt since fellowship. The mechanism was new. The mechanism was the thing Silberstein had described in 1996. 23 years between his prediction and the trial result. 23 years is the unit of medical innovation. Most physicians do not get to watch a prediction land that cleanly in their own field during their working life. I watched this one land. I started prescribing the drug to patients for whom the older preventives, topiramate, propranolol, valproate, the tricyclics, were either not working or producing the kind of side effect load that wrecked their daily life. The drug worked. It worked the way the trial said it would. My patients had fewer migraine days. Some had no migraine days for stretches that would have been impossible on the older preventives. I noticed. I prescribed. I did not yet know that I had been entered into a database. The first speaker program invitation arrived by email in March of 2020. The sender was Maria Beth Fisher-Zaitsev. She was a senior medical affairs liaison for the manufacturer, Theranex Therapeutics, a Connecticut-headquartered specialty pharmaceutical company that had recently brought the drug to market. She had a Stanford pharmacology PhD from 2014. She had immigrated from St. Petersburg in 1996 as a graduate student. She wrote in clean, professional English. The email did not pitch a product. The email invited me to a continuing medical education adjacent dinner with 3 other community headache specialists from the Philadelphia and southern New Jersey corridor. The format would be a structured peer exchange around prescribing patterns in CGRP antagonist therapy. The location would be a private back room of a hotel in Cherry Hill. The honorarium would be $4,000, paid by check to my practice. There would be a discussion guide. There would not be a script. I want you to understand what March of 2020 felt like in West Philadelphia. The world had just begun to close. Restaurants were boarded. The neighborhood public spaces were either shut or thinly populated. My waiting room had 3 patients on a typical morning, down from 12. I was watching a small business I had built over 22 years contract in real time. The invitation was not financial rescue. It was not a lifeline. The $4,000 was a small fraction of a month of practice overhead. But the invitation arrived in a moment when the structures of professional belonging that had organized my life since residency, conferences, grand rounds, peer dinners, hospital affiliations, were either canceled or moved to video. Maria Beth's email offered something my profession had been quietly losing. It offered a small back room with 3 colleagues and a meal and a conversation about a drug I genuinely believed in. I accepted within an hour. I did not negotiate. I did not consult my CPA. I did not ask whether the $4,000 would be reported on a 1099. I clicked reply. I wrote 2 sentences. I sent the email. The dinner was on a Thursday evening, March 19, 2020. The hotel was the Cherry Hill Crown on Route 70. The back room was small and dimly lit and had a single round table set for 6. Maria Beth was there in a navy suit and a white blouse. She was 41 years old. She had a soft accent, the rhythm of Russian under the English, almost gone but not quite. There was one junior Theranex analyst whose name I do not remember, a man in his late 20s who handled the slides and the meal logistics. There were 3 peer neurologists, Dr. Suresh Patel Reddy from Cherry Hill, who I had known since a 2007 New Jersey Neurological Society meeting, Dr. Kieran Fitzpatrick Boyer from Wilmington, Delaware, who had been a Jefferson Fellow 2 years behind me, Dr. Folake Olabode Sanderson from Center City, Philadelphia, a Nigerian-American neurologist who had trained at Hopkins. We sat at the round table, and we ate a passable salmon, and we talked for 2 hours and 10 minutes about rimegepant prescribing in our community panels. The conversation was real. The clinical exchange was real. Maria Beth moderated lightly. She asked good questions. She did not push. She did not have a slide deck loaded with brand messaging. She had a single piece of paper with 5 discussion prompts. We covered 3 of them. The honorarium check arrived at my practice the following Tuesday. $4,000 made out to Cordy Morrison Neurology PC with a memo line that read, Educational Engagement Honorarium, March 19th, 2020. I deposited it. I went home. I slept. I want to pause here because most stories about pharmaceutical kickbacks present the first dinner as the trap. They want you to feel the click of the door closing. There was no click. There was no trap. There was a small back room and 4 colleagues and a real conversation about a real drug and $4,000 that, on a per-hour basis, was approximately $150 an hour for 2 hours of professional time, which is roughly what I would charge an out-of-network consultation for the same duration. The honorarium was inside the bounds of what a careful person could call reasonable compensation for professional expertise. The honorarium was not the violation. The honorarium was the entry point into a structure that, taken whole over 28 months, would bend my prescribing pattern into a shape that could not be defended. The first dinner did not bend anything. The first dinner was a dinner. I want you to hold the difference between the first dinner and the cumulative structure, because that difference is where I lived for 28 months. That difference is where most physicians who end up in a kickback case live. The first dinner is innocent. The structure that emerges from 47 dinners across an industry is not. The second dinner was in August of 2020. Cherry Hill Crown again, same back room, same configuration, 4 neurologists, 1 liaison, 1 junior analyst. Different drug discussion, this time about subcutaneous injection options for chronic migraine prevention. Honorarium $4,500. After the formal portion ended, the others left, and Maria Beth and I stayed at the table for an extra 40 minutes over coffee. She told me about her father. He had died of an ischemic stroke in St. Petersburg in 2018 at the age of 71. He had suffered from chronic migraine since his late 20s. He had never had a treatment that worked. He had spent 40 years of his adult life living through 3 migraine days a week. The CGRP antagonist class did not exist yet when he was alive. She told me she had taken the medical affairs liaison position at Theranex partly because the company was developing this drug class and she wanted to be present for its delivery into clinical practice. She told me she believed, sincerely believed, that the drug was a humanitarian product. I watched her say it. I watched her face while she said it. She was not performing. She meant it. I went home that night, and I sat in my parlor, and I thought about Maria Beth's father, and I thought about my own mother, who had migraine with aura through her 40s before she got cancer, and who would have benefited from this drug if it had existed when she needed it. I went to bed. I did not pray about it. I am Methodist by upbringing, and I do not pray about drug companies. But I held the conviction Maria Beth had given me. I held it, and I let it become part of how I thought about the program. The program was designed to work through sincere conviction. The program was not designed to work through bribery. The honorarium was not the lever. The lever was the slow accretion of believed colleagueship around a drug that was actually good. Maria Beth was not a corrupt person. Maria Beth was a true believer in the drug. The architects of the program had figured out, somewhere in a Connecticut office, that the most effective community physician influence pathway was not financial inducement, but parasocial collegial conviction delivered through repeated small dinners by a person who actually loved the drug. I did not understand this in August of 2020. I understood this in October of 2022. I am giving it to you now because you cannot follow the next 28 months without it. Holland Bennett Tremaine Caldwell entered my field of vision in June of 2021 at the American Headache Society annual meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was 47 years old at the time, Yale undergraduate, Yale Medical School, Yale Endocrinology residency, brief Harvard postdoctoral fellowship, then 3 years of academic neurology at Mass General, then a transition into pharmaceutical medical affairs at Theranex in 2017. He was the Vice President of Medical Affairs. He gave a 32-minute plenary podium talk titled, Updates in CGRP Antagonist Therapy. He wore a charcoal suit and thin frame glasses, and he had the specific Yale academic posture that combines slight stoop with intellectual generosity. His slides were on label, scrupulously on label, no brand name mentioned even once, only the generic chemical entity name, only the published data, only the FDA-approved indications. He closed his talk with a sentence I want you to hear in his voice. Education in the community physician segment is the structural underpinning of all of this. He paused for half a beat after the word education. He paused for a quarter beat after the word underpinning. He let the sentence land. The auditorium applauded. I applauded. I believed him. I want to be clear about that. I believed him completely in June of 2021. He sounded like every good academic physician I had ever trained under. He sounded like Silberstein. He sounded like the people I had wanted to be when I was a fellow. Marcus Chesterfield Halloran Whitaker entered my field of vision 6 months later, in December of 2021, at a closed Theranex-hosted reception in Midtown Manhattan after an American Academy of Neurology regional meeting. He was 42 years old, Holy Cross undergraduate, Wharton MBA. He had never been in clinical medicine. He had been in pharmaceutical commercial operations for 14 years across 3 companies. He was the Vice President of Commercial Operations at Theranex. The reception was at a private club in Midtown, dark wood paneling, low chandeliers, 25 guests. I introduced myself. He shook my hand. His grip was firm and brief. He had a Holy Cross signet ring and the specific Wellesley husband cadence that some Wharton men acquire in their 30s. He asked me about my practice. I said West Philadelphia, Medicare and Medicaid heavy panel. He said wonderful market segment for us. Then he turned to greet the next guest. The exchange lasted 40 seconds. I felt something move in my chest when he said the words market segment. I did not name what moved. I let it move, and I kept the polite smile on my face, and I thanked the host, and I went back to my hotel. I did not write it down. I did not call my CPA. I did not call Yatunde, who I did not yet know existed in my life as a future qui tam attorney. I just registered the discomfort, and I let it sink. The first subliminal recognition was December of 2021. The full recognition was October of 2022. 10 months between the first signal and the full reading. That is how slow this kind of recognition is, in the kind of person I am. The inaugural speaker plaque arrived in November of 2021. The dinner was at Vetri Cucina in the Italian Market on November 12, 2021. Private dining room at the back of the second floor. Round table for 4 plus Maria Beth and the junior analyst. I gave a 40-minute presentation for the first time as the named speaker of record. The slides had been provided to me 3 weeks earlier, vetted by Theranex Medical Affairs, on label, peer-reviewed citations. I added 2 of my own clinical case discussions, anonymized, with patient consent obtained where applicable. The peer neurologists at the table were Patel Reddy, Olabode Sanderson, and a new neurologist from the Northeast Philadelphia Hospital Network, whose name I will not include. Maria Beth moderated. The presentation went well. The clinical discussion afterward went well. Honorarium $4,800. After the formal portion, Maria Beth lifted a small lacquered box from beside her chair and placed it in front of me. She said, "Doctor, the company would like to recognize your inaugural service as a speaker of record for the Headache Excellence Circuit. Open it." I opened it. Inside was a polished rosewood plaque, 8 inches by 10, engraved in gold leaf serif lettering. Dr. Abena Quarty Morrison, inaugural speaker, 2021 Theranex Headache Excellence Circuit. The wood was warm under my hand. The engraving was clean. I said thank you. I closed the box. I carried it home. The following Monday morning, before my first patient, I lifted the plaque out of the box and I placed it on the 3rd shelf of my waiting room, beside the Penn diplomas and the Jefferson certificate and the photograph of my mother. The third shelf had been empty since 1998. The plaque filled it. Mary Bridget Epstein had been my patient since 2014. She was a retired second-grade teacher from the Francis E. Willard Elementary School. She had taught in West Philadelphia for 38 years, including the years my mother had taught at Anna L. Howard. They had not known each other. They had been at adjacent schools in the same district during the same decades, and they had moved in slightly different orbits. Mary had been a chronic migraine patient since her late 30s. She had tried every preventive in the standard ladder, with mixed success. She came to me in 2014, referred by her primary care doctor at Lankenau. She was 62 then. She was a widow. Her husband had died in 2017 from cardiac complications, and after his death, she had moved into a smaller apartment off Baltimore Avenue near 50th Street on a fixed Social Security and pension income. Her son, Vincent Jr., her only child, a 50-year-old union plumber in Roxborough, helped her with rent in lean months and groceries in tight weeks, and prescription costs whenever the formulary tier shifted. Mary came to my practice every 3 months for follow-up. She was warm. She remembered details. She asked after Amma by name. She brought butter cookies in December. She noticed the new plaque on the third shelf at her January 2022 follow-up, and she told me she was so proud of me. I said, "Thank you, Mary." I returned to writing her renewal. Her January 2022 renewal was for rimegepant, twice weekly as needed. I had switched her from the older preventative sumatriptan to the new prophylactic rimegepant in October of 2021 because the trial data on the new drug was strong and because she had had 2 breakthrough cluster periods in the previous year on the old regimen. The renewal was clinically defensible. It was also more expensive. Rimegepant was on a higher Medicare Part D tier than sumatriptan generic. The out-of-pocket cost difference, after coverage, was $86 per month. I did not ask Mary about that cost difference at the January 2022 visit. I assumed her insurance was handling it. I had not run the numbers. I had not pulled her formulary data. I had switched the prescription based on clinical reasoning that was real, but that, on later review, was also subtly accelerated by a structural pattern I had not yet recognized. I am telling you the truth in the order it actually happened. The clinical reasoning was real. The clinical reasoning was also not sufficient. Both things were true at once, and I had not yet figured out how to hold them both. The CPA appointment was on April 2nd, 2022. Glenmore Owusu Achebe, my father's friend from Legon, class of 1976, who had run a one-man tax practice from a second-floor office above a Ghanaian grocery on Walnut Street since 1989. Glenmore was 80 years old. He wore bifocal glasses. He had a single bookshelf of tax statutes and a framed Legon graduation photograph from 1976 that included my father standing 2 rows behind him at the ceremony. He had done my taxes since 1999. He had done my parents' taxes since 1985. He had done my daughter's first tax return in 2019, when Emma had filed her first 1040 from a college work-study job. Glenmore's office was modest. Glenmore was modest. Glenmore had never said a strong word about anything in 23 years of professional contact, except once, in 2011, when my father had wanted to take an aggressive deduction on his Temple adjunct stipend, and Glenmore had told him in Twi that the IRS was a serious institution, and one did not antagonize serious institutions for small money. My father had laughed and dropped the deduction. That was the only time in 23 years. Glenmore laid out the IRS Form 1099-MISC documents across his desk on April 2, 2022. $24,800 in honorarium income for tax year 2021. $12,600 in honorarium income received ahead of schedule in the first quarter of 2022. He looked at me over the bifocals. He said, "Doctor, this is rather a lot for educational programs." He used the careful Ghanaian-American restraint that meant he was waiting for me to acknowledge the size of the number without him having to be the one to name it. I did not acknowledge it. I sat in his client chair, and I looked at the documents, and I let the silence go on for 9 seconds. And then I said, I will pay the additional federal tax. He said, "Yes, doctor. I will prepare the return." We finished the appointment in 11 minutes. I wrote a check for the additional federal tax. I drove home. I went into the parlor of my row home. I looked at the photograph of my father on the side table. I went upstairs. I did not eat dinner. The plaque on the third shelf of the waiting room downtown was still in my mind. The stomach drop was real. It had dropped one floor. It had not yet dropped to the basement. I had not yet pulled the spreadsheets. I had not yet seen what I had become. I was still inside the architecture, and the architecture still felt like a structure that benefited my patients, and that paid me reasonable honoraria for legitimate clinical expertise. April 2nd, 2022. Glenmore's silence was the first external warning I had received from a person I trusted. I did not act on it for 6 months and 20 days. Mary Bridget Epstein arrived at my office for her routine follow-up on October 22nd, 2022, at 11:14 in the morning. She was 73 years old. She was wearing a cream-colored cardigan and reading glasses on a thin chain around her neck. She sat on the round black examination stool I had been planning to replace for 9 years because the vinyl seat had cracked in 2013 and I had never gotten around to ordering a new one. The walls of exam room 2 were sage green, the same color as the kitchen of my row home, because I had painted them in 2008 with the same can of paint, and I had liked how it looked, and I had never repainted. Mary's chart was open on the small desk. I had auscultated her temporal pulses for aura pattern assessment. I was about to write the renewal. Mary mentioned, in the tone she would have used to mention the weather, that her son Vincent Jr. had been helping her with the cost of the new pill for the last 18 or 20 months because the change had pushed her grocery budget $86 short every month, and she could not absorb that on her pension. I stopped writing. I set the pen down. I looked at her. I asked, "Mary, the new pill, has it been better than the old one?" She thought about it. She is a careful woman. She does not exaggerate. She said, "It does its job. The old one did its job. They both do their job." I sat back on my own stool. I did not say anything for a long minute. I asked her if she wanted to go back to the older preventive. She said, no. She said the new one was fine. The new one was working. Vincent Jr. had already arranged the cost help. She did not want to disrupt anything. I wrote her renewal for the new pill. I walked her out to the front desk. I came back into exam room 2. I closed the door. I sat on the round black stool with the cracked vinyl seat. I sat there for 40 minutes. I did not cry. I did not move. I sat. The column shifted. That is the only way I know how to describe it. It is a phrase I have used twice in my life. The first time was in 1996, when I made the decision to specialize in headache medicine after watching my mother go through her first severe migraine with aura at age 43. The second time was October 22nd, 2022, at 11:54 in the morning, in exam room 2, on a cracked vinyl stool, after a 73-year-old retired second-grade teacher told me her son was paying $86 a month so she could stay on the pill I had switched her to during the third year of a speaker program that had paid me $37,400. I closed the practice early that day. I told Janelle Brooks Tilford, my front office coordinator, that I had a family matter. She nodded. She rebooked the afternoon. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table at 4814 Spruce Street. I opened my laptop. I exported my prescribing records from Dr. Chrono, the electronic health record I had used since 2015, into a CSV file. I pulled the data from May 2018 through October 2022. I opened a new spreadsheet. I built a column for new pill prescriptions per quarter. I built a column for old pill prescriptions per quarter. I built a column for total migraine patient encounters per quarter. I built a column for honorarium dates from the Theranex speaker program. Then I went to the Federal Open Payments Database. The federal government runs a public database under the Physician Payments Sunshine Act. Every payment from a pharmaceutical manufacturer to a physician above $10 is reported. The reports are public. Anyone can search them. I had never searched my own. I searched my own. The first time I saw my own open payments record on the federal database, I sat at the kitchen table for 12 minutes without moving. $24,800 for 2021. $12,600 for the first quarter of 2022. Smaller amounts for 2020. I copied the numbers into the spreadsheet. I went to the records of the 3 peer neurologists I had been dining with regularly: Patel Reddy, Fitzpatrick Boyer, Olabode Sanderson. I searched each of them. Their open payments numbers were a fraction of mine. They had attended the same dinners. They had received the same per-dinner honoraria, mostly, but they had not been added to the inaugural speaker plaque circuit, and they had not been given the additional $12,600 in advance speaker fees in the first quarter of 2022, and their cumulative totals were each under $15,000. I had been singled out. The plaque had been singling. I had not understood the plaque as a singling. I had understood the plaque as a recognition of my clinical voice. The plaque had been the company telling me, and only me, in a small room at Vetri Cucina, that I was the speaker of record they would now run their inaugural community circuit through. I added the open payments columns to my spreadsheet. I plotted the curves. My new pill prescribing rose in a smooth ascending arc that began in the second quarter of 2020 and continued through the third quarter of 2022. The arc had 2 visible inflection points. The first was October 2020, 2 months after the second dinner with Maria Beth and her father's story. The second was December 2021, 3 weeks after the inaugural plaque. The peer neurologist's new pill prescribing was flat across the same period. Theirs went up modestly during the new pill rollout, plateaued in early 2021, and stayed plateaued. Mine went up, kept going up, and was 47% above the cluster average by the third quarter of 2022. 47%. I checked the math 3 times. It was 47%. I sat at the kitchen table at 4814 Spruce Street until 2:14 in the morning. I did not sleep that night. I went to my practice in the morning. I ran through my patients. I came home. I sat back down at the kitchen table. I opened the spreadsheet again. I looked at the curve. I did not know yet what I was going to do. I knew I was going to do something. I did not know whether the something was a confidential conversation with Glenmore, or a confidential conversation with my division contacts at Penn, or a confidential conversation with a lawyer. I knew it had to be a lawyer eventually. I knew the spreadsheet was not the kind of document that you handle alone. Yetunde Adeyemi Brennan came to me through my father, or rather, through my father's memory. Her father, Dr. Adetokunbo Adeyemi Brennan, had been a retired family medicine physician in Drexel Hill, and he had known Kofi from the small Ghanaian and Nigerian professional émigré community in Philadelphia in the late 70s and early 80s. Yetunde was 52. She had gone to Yale Law in 2003. She had spent 11 years at the Department of Justice Civil Fraud Section in Washington from 2003 to 2014. She had left to become a partner at Brennan Stoddard Adeyemi LLP in New Haven, Connecticut, where she ran the firm's qui tam and False Claims Act practice. She was known nationally in that bar. I had not known her personally. I had known her name through her father's obituary, which my father had read aloud at our kitchen table in 2012, and which had mentioned her as the surviving daughter who practiced federal law in Connecticut. I called her practice on December 7, 2022, at 9:03 in the morning. I told her receptionist I was Dr. Abena Corte Morrison, and I was the daughter of Kofi Corte of Philadelphia, and her father had known mine. The receptionist put me on hold. Yetunde came on the line in 11 minutes. I explained for 23 minutes. I described the program. I described the dinners. I described the plaque. I described the spreadsheet. I described the patient encounter on October 22nd with Mary. I described the prescribing curve. I described the disparity with the peer cluster. I described the inflection points. Yetunde listened. She did not interrupt. She did not ask clarifying questions until the end. When I had finished, she said, "Doctor, this is a qui tam case. We file in the District of Connecticut because Theranex is incorporated there. We file under seal. The seal is typically 18 to 24 months. The Department of Justice will investigate. They will decide whether to intervene. If they intervene and recover a settlement, the relator, which is you, receives a portion of the federal recovery under Title 31, Section 3730 of the United States Code. The relator share is statutorily set at 15 to 25% of the federal recovery in intervened cases. Your share will be in that range. There is one structural matter you need to absorb before we go further. You are also a recipient of the alleged kickback payments. You will be a relator who is also a recipient. The case law on this configuration is messy. The Department of Justice has taken inconsistent positions over the past 15 years on whether and to what extent recipient relators can receive their full share. You should expect the share calculation to be contested. You should expect that your name will become public when the case unseals. Are you prepared for an 18 to 24-month seal? Are you prepared for the public name? Are you prepared for the moral asymmetry that you will receive money as a recipient? I said, Miss Adeyemi Brennan, I do not want the relator share. I want the case filed. The share, whatever it is calculated to be, will not come to me personally. She was quiet for 9 seconds. She said, Doctor, that is your decision, and we will structure it. We will discuss the foundation architecture in a separate appointment. I will draft the complaint this week. I will send you a draft for review next week. We will refine. We will file before the end of the year. The seal will start the day we file. From that day forward, we cannot discuss this case with anyone outside the federal investigation framework. Not your CPA, not your colleagues, not your daughter, not your patients. The seal is absolute. Are you prepared for that constraint? I said yes. She said, I am sorry for the loss of your father. I never met yours, but mine spoke of him. I said, mine spoke of yours. The complaint was filed on December 14, 2022. Corday Morrison versus Theranex Pharmaceutical Holding Company, United States District Court for the District of Connecticut. Sealed. Yetunde drove me to the federal courthouse on Church Street in New Haven on the morning of the filing. I signed the verification page. We submitted the complaint through the clerk's office. We walked outside. It was cold. There was a gray winter sky over the courthouse, and the sealed envelope in the clerk's hands was now the only document that mattered, and the document was no longer in the world I could touch. The seal had begun. I drove home to Philadelphia. The plaque on the third shelf of my waiting room was still there. I did not move it. I did not change anything in my practice. I kept seeing patients. I kept writing renewals where they were clinically warranted, including for Mary, who continued on the new pill because the clinical case for her continuing was real, and because we had not yet untangled what I would eventually do about the patients who had been part of the elevated prescribing curve. I would untangle that later. The seal demanded that I handle nothing differently in the visible world while the federal investigation proceeded. I lived under the seal for 2 years and 26 days. December 14, 2022, until January 9, 2025. During those 2 years, 3 things happened in my life. The first was that my prescribing pattern normalized. I did not abruptly switch every patient off the new pill. I worked through each case clinically. Some patients stayed on the new pill because the new pill was clinically right for them. Some patients I stepped down to the older generic preventive over the course of 3 to 6 months, with their consent, with full explanation of options. By the end of 2024, my new pill prescribing had returned to the cluster average. I documented every clinical decision. I expected, correctly, that the federal investigators would eventually subpoena my prescribing records. They did. Yetunde handled the subpoena. The records were clean. The records showed what had happened, and they also showed what I had done about it during the seal. The second thing that happened was that my father died. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma was diagnosed on November 4, 2023. He went on hospice at home in February 2024. He died at Penn Presbyterian Medical Center on May 14, 2024, at 4:47 in the afternoon, with me holding his right hand, with Amma on his left hand, with my mother's sister Ekwa connected from Kumasi by tablet video. He was conscious until the last 40 minutes. He looked at me near the end. He said, Aben, ade aide no, ye no bere bere. He was repeating the sentence he had said to me at the kitchen table in Strawberry Mansion in 1983. He was repeating it because he wanted me to know he remembered it, and that he wanted me to use it for whatever the hard thing was that was in front of me. I did not tell him about the Ketam case. The seal forbade it. He died not knowing. I will carry that. I have carried it for 3 years. We buried half of his ashes at Mount Moriah next to my mother. Aunt Ekwa took the other half home to Kumasi Tafo Cemetery in December of 2024. I attended the Philadelphia memorial service at the Methodist Church of Ghana Social Hall on Hunting Park Avenue on May 26, 2024. The pastor was Pastor Mensa Bonsu. The choir sang 2 hymns in English and 1 in Twi. Amma sat next to me. She held my left hand for the entire service. I did not cry until the second hymn. I cried quietly for the rest of the service. The third thing that happened during the seal was that my practice continued. Mary continued. Janelle continued. Lourdes Vasquez Barreras, my medical assistant since 2009, continued. The waiting room continued to have 3 patients on a typical morning, sometimes 4. The third shelf still held the plaque. I had decided not to remove the plaque during the seal because removing it would have required an explanation, and the seal forbade explanations. I let the plaque stay. I let the patients see it. I let myself see it every morning when I walked through the waiting room to unlock exam room 1. The plaque became, during those 2 years, a kind of penance. I had not been able to tell anyone what was happening. I had not been able to tell my CPA, my daughter, my colleagues, my patients, my dying father. The plaque sat on the shelf, and it told me every morning what I had done, and that I was waiting for the federal government to decide whether what I had done would result in a settlement that returned the money to the federal treasury. The plaque was the visible weight of a hidden process. I lived with that weight for 2 years and 26 days. The case unsealed on January 9, 2025. Yetunde called me at 8:14 in the morning. I was at the kitchen table at 4814 Spruce Street with my coffee. She said, "Doctor, the case unsealed this morning. The Department of Justice intervened. The settlement is $59,700,000. The press release will be issued by the District of Connecticut at noon Eastern." Theranex Therapeutics, which had been acquired in 2023 by a larger pharmaceutical parent through a corporate transaction that I will not name, has admitted certain factual allegations and denied others, and has paid the settlement without admitting liability under the False Claims Act. The corporate veil holds. The parent company is not named in the settlement. The parent stock will move 4% on the day. The relator share, calculated at 10% of the federal recovery under the contested recipient relator framework, is approximately $5,970,000 gross. After Yale Law, DC rate fees, and federal income tax, your net is approximately $3,500,000. I remembered our December 7, 2022 phone call. I said, "Yetunde, my position has not changed." She said, "I know, doctor. The foundation structure is ready. We can sign documents in February. The fund will be named the Kofi Korte Community Physician Pharmaceutical Industry Education Independence Fund. We will operate it as a 501c3. I said, "Thank you, Yetunde." She said, "I am glad your father was a good man." I said, "Mine was. Yours was." I want to speak briefly about the indictment because the asymmetry of consequences is the thing most viewers will want to know about. Marcus Chesterfield Halloran Whitaker was indicted on March 11, 2026, in the District of Connecticut on a single conspiracy count under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1349, related charges under the federal anti-kickback statute. He surrendered on March 12, 2026, in New Haven. He pleaded guilty on April 7, 2026, to a single conspiracy count with a 5-year statutory maximum, with cooperation departure announced. His sentencing was scheduled for August 14, 2026, before Judge Janet Bond Arterton at the Richard C. Lee Federal Building. The anticipated guideline range was 14 to 18 months at FCI Otisville Camp. Marcus is married to Margaret Halloran Whitaker. They have 3 children, Lucinda 15, Cooper 13, Aubrey 10. Lucinda is in her sophomore year at the Berkshire School in Sheffield, Massachusetts. Cooper is in 8th grade at the same boarding school's middle program. Aubrey is in 5th grade at the day school in Greenwich, Connecticut, where the family lives. Margaret has been quoted in 2 New York Times articles about the case. She said her husband had made errors of judgment. She did not say her husband had been a criminal. She did not say her husband had been wronged. She said he had made errors of judgment and that the family would absorb the consequences and that she would continue to be present for the children. I am not going to celebrate this. Marcus will go to Otisville for 14 to 18 months. His children will visit him on weekends. He will come home in 2027 or 2028. I do not need him to suffer more than the law requires. Holland Bennett Tremaine Caldwell was not indicted. The press release from the District of Connecticut named him only by his title, Vice President of Medical Affairs, in 2 paragraphs of factual recitation. He was not personally charged. His employment was retained by the parent pharmaceutical company after the acquisition. He continued to give podium talks at the American Headache Society annual meetings of 2026 and 2027 on the topic of community physician CGRP antagonist education. His talks did not mention the settlement. He has never apologized publicly. He has never apologized privately. He has never written to me. I have never written to him. I do not expect an apology. I am not entitled to an apology. The structural fact of the matter is that a sincere believer who designed a community physician engagement architecture inside the legal regulatory boundaries that the Department of Justice did not choose to litigate against personally is now retained by his company and continues to speak at the same conferences I attended in 2021 and 2022. The corporate veil holds. The sincere believer remains protected. The criminal track executive goes to a federal camp for 14 to 18 months. The community physician who reported the conduct retains her practice. The patient continues to take the pill at $86 a month with help from her son. The settlement returns the federal money to the federal treasury. Each of those outcomes is in some sense correct. None of those outcomes is satisfying. The Kofi Korte Community Physician Pharmaceutical Industry Education Independence Fund was incorporated as a 501c3 educational nonprofit in Connecticut on February 14, 2025. Yetunde drafted the trust documents. Glenmore agreed to serve as the foundation treasurer pro bono. I am the founding director. The fund's mission is to provide 3 two-year fellowships per cohort to community primary care and community neurology physicians whose practices serve majority Medicare and Medicaid patient panels and who commit, during the fellowship period, to declining all pharmaceutical industry honorarium income. The fellowship pays a stipend equivalent to 10% of the recipient's documented prior year practice revenue, up to a cap of $80,000 per year, plus a continuing medical education travel budget of $6,000 per year, drawn exclusively from sources that have no pharmaceutical industry funding. The first cohort of 3 fellows was selected through a rolling application process across spring and summer 2026. The selection committee was Yetunde, Glenmore, Pastor Mensa Bonsu, and 2 outside advisors from primary care medicine in West and North Philadelphia. I recused myself from the selection. I did not see the applications. I did not know the names of the finalists until they were announced. The first cohort was announced in April of 2027. Dr. Linnea Ando Pemberton, a primary care physician in Camden, New Jersey, who runs a panel that is 62% Medicaid. She is herself a third-generation Ghanaian American, born in Newark in 1991, the granddaughter of a Methodist minister from Cape Coast who immigrated in 1972. Dr. Joaquin Morales Ortega, a community neurologist in Kensington, Philadelphia, first-generation Mexican American, born in Tucson in 1989, with a panel that is 54% Medicaid and 40% Medicare. Dr. Wendy Stone King Brzezinski, a primary care physician in Olney, Philadelphia, second-generation Polish American, born in Philadelphia in 1985, with a panel that is 46% Medicare and 38% Medicaid. The 3 fellows accepted the awards in May of 2027. They began the fellowship period on July 1st, 2027. The inaugural cohort dinner, where the fellows were welcomed publicly by the small Philadelphia Ghanaian community and by Methodist Church of Ghana congregants, was scheduled for October 4th, 2027, at the church's rented social hall on West Hunting Park Avenue. I want to walk you through 3 afternoons before I close this account. They are the 3 afternoons that constitute the residue, the aftershock, the part that sits in the body after the legal mechanism has finished its work. The first afternoon was April 18th, 2027, at 4:14 in the afternoon at Mount Moriah Cemetery on Kingsessing Avenue in West Philadelphia, in the African American section, at the joint plot where my mother Caroline lay beneath a granite marker since 2019 and where half of my father's ashes had been interred since 2024. I had walked there alone from my row home at 4814 Spruce Street. It is a 40-minute walk if the weather is fair. I did not bring flowers. I do not bring flowers to that plot. My mother did not like cut flowers. She said cut flowers were a way of celebrating something by killing it slowly in a vase. I brought instead, in the right pocket of my coat, the small carved Sankofa wooden bird that my father had bought me at Cobbs Creek Park on Ghana Independence Day in 1991. I had been 23 years old in 1991. I had been preparing for residency interviews. We had walked to Cobbs Creek Park on a warm March Saturday, and there had been a small Ghanaian Independence Day cultural festival in the field beside the playground. There had been a woodcarver from Aquadia displaying carved Sankofa birds at a folding table. My father had bought one for me. He had paid $18. He had handed me the bird, and he had explained, in English first and then in Twi, that the Sankofa is the symbol of the act of returning for what was forgotten. The bird's neck is bent backward. It carries an egg in its beak. The egg is the future. The bird looks back at the past, not to mourn it, but to retrieve from it whatever the present needs. He said, "Aben," the Asantes say, "Se wo wer fina wo Sankofa a Yankee." He said the literal English. "It is not a sin to return for what you have forgotten." He said, "Some Twi sentences English does not carry the weight of." I wrote it down on a note card at home that night. I kept the note card in the bottom drawer of my desk for 36 years. I knelt on the granite at Mount Moriah, and I placed the wooden bird between the 2 nameplates of my parents. I sat there for 11 minutes. I did not cry. I had cried at the Methodist Memorial in May 2024, and I had cried at the gravesite in May 2024, and I had cried in the kitchen of my row home in early 2025, the week the case unsealed. But I did not cry at Mount Moriah on April 18th, 2027. I spoke aloud in Twi. I said, "Papa, mabako fanea makai mu." I said, "Father, I have come back for what I had forgotten." The phrasing is from the Sankofa proverb. The grammar is conversational. He would have corrected my grammar. He would have laughed and said the verb tense was off by 1 beat. He would have explained why. He would have made tea afterward. I sat there for 3 more minutes after I said the sentence. The wind moved the dry grass on the African American section. The sound was small. The volunteer-cleared central path was 60 feet to my right. I stood up. I walked out of the cemetery. I walked back to 4814 Spruce Street. I passed the Strawberry Mansion block where my parents had lived from 1985 to 2011. I passed the brick storefront on Hunting Park Avenue where the Methodist Church of Ghana rented the social hall. I passed the corner of 18th Street and Walnut Street where Davio's Italian Steakhouse occupies a ground floor of a corporate office tower and where I had given my 4th speaker program presentation on May 6, 2021. I did not slow down at Davio's. I did not look at the front window. I did not check whether the back private dining room I had used was visible from the sidewalk. I walked past. I kept the same pace. I went home. The second afternoon was June 6, 2027, at 9:14 in the morning, at my practice at 4814 Spruce Street, in Exam Room 2, with Mary Bridget Epstein, age 75. She was wearing a different cardigan, a soft gray one. The reading glasses were the same. The cracked vinyl examination stool was the same. I had not replaced it. I had been planning to replace it for 11 years now. She came in for her routine quarterly follow-up. I auscultated her temporal pulses. I sat down on the round black stool. I said, "Mary, I want to tell you something about the medication you have been taking, the rimegepant. There has been quite a lot in the news over the last several years about the way the manufacturer marketed that medication to physicians. I want you to understand that the medication itself does what it is supposed to do. It works. The pill is a good pill. The way the company sold the pill to physicians like me involved payments that were not appropriate. I spoke to lawyers. I spoke to the federal government. The case was settled in January of 2025 for $59,700,000. The reason I am telling you now and not earlier is that I was under a federal seal until that date, and I could not speak about it to you or to anyone. I want you to know that there was a pattern, that I was part of the pattern, and that I am sorry for the part of the pattern that touched you." Mary was quiet for 40 seconds. Then she said, "Doctor, did you make the medication work for me?" I said, "Mary, I made sure the medication worked for you. The pill always worked for you. The pill is fine. The problem was in the system around the pill. The pill itself is fine." She said, "So you did your job for me, even when the system was not doing its job?" I did not answer. I let the silence go on. She reached out and patted my hand twice. She said, "Doctor, you did your job. The system is the system. You did your job for me. That is what matters." She got up. She took the renewal slip. She walked out of the exam room. I sat on the cracked vinyl stool for 9 minutes. I thought about my father. I thought about the plaque that had been in the lower right drawer of my kitchen sideboard for 2.5 years now, on top of the manila folder containing the 3 signed educational engagement agreements and the IRS Form 1099. I had not opened the drawer in 14 months. I was not certain I would ever open it again. I was certain I would not throw the plaque away. The plaque is evidence. Evidence is preserved. The third afternoon was October 4th, 2027, at 7:45 in the evening at the rented social hall of the Methodist Church of Ghana on Hunting Park Avenue in North Philadelphia. The hall is on the ground floor of a converted warehouse 2 blocks east of the elevated train. Linoleum floor, plastic folding chairs from the church basement, a length of kente cloth tacked across the back wall, gold and green and black. 3 round tables set with cream paper tablecloths, 18 places set. The dinner was the inaugural cohort welcome for the Kofi Korte Fund, the first time the 3 fellows would be received publicly by the small Philadelphia community that the fund was anchored in. Pastor Mensa Bonsu opened the evening with a brief grace in English and Twi. The grace was 30 seconds long. He did not preach. He thanked God for the meal and for the work the 3 fellows would do, and for the memory of Kofi Korte, whom he had known since 1991, when Kofi first attended the Methodist Church of Ghana congregation as a guest of Auntie Beatrice Aidu Mensa, who had run the Sunday school for 27 years and who was at the dinner that night in a navy dress. The 3 fellows were at the head table with Yatunde, who had flown in from New Haven, and with Glenmore, who walked the 4 blocks from his apartment. The 3 fellows were Linnea, Joaquin, and Wendy. They did not know I was the sole funder of the fund. They knew the fund was named for an immigrant temple economics adjunct named Kofi Korte. They had been told he was the father of the founding director. They had not been told the founding